Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. We were having a few technical difficulties, but we made it to today's bite with Adelina Chalmers, who's the founder of the Geek Whisperer. And today we're going to be talking about the Glasscliff female and minority CTOs face in companies. So the point of today's chat is just that. We hope to have a chat and a Q&A session with you, our audience, and Adelina. So we've gotten the conversation started by launching a couple of polls. You'll be able to see those in the software in your screen on Crowdcast. So please, if you can, please contribute to the polls so we can get to know a little bit more about you. And I'll launch a couple more throughout the discussion. If you could also please use the Q&A or the chat function to be a part of the conversation to ask your questions. That way we can get the discussion started. But before we start, I'm going to hand it over to Adelina so she can introduce herself and a bit more about today's topic. Adelina?
Thank you very much, Hannah. And can you not hear me?
Can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. I think there's a delay on the line still for some reason. I'm really delighted that we're doing this session today because in my experience of working with companies as small as 10 people and as big as 100,000 people, I've noticed some patterns of not just women, but also minority and also actually engineers or engineering experts with not necessarily who are not necessarily in with the rest of the C-suite or with the investors, often get called upon at the last minute to rescue a crisis situation. And I wrote a post about this, and I understand there were a lot of questions people wanted to follow up on from that post. And this is what today's session is about. I want to answer all of your questions that you might have about this topic. This is not me about giving another presentation all over again. Following on from those challenges that women and various minorities face when they are given a CTO role that actually it's potentially a trap. And I think it might be useful today, but I want to see your questions. What sort of things could help you do in that situation? If you are in that situation, how can you first of all probably identify that situation? Maybe it's worth discussing that. And also, how can you prevent it from happening to you, or how can you minimize the damage it could have on your career if you're in that sort of situation? So I'm very open to questions and suggestions and ideas. And also, if you want to discuss more the kind of case studies I've seen, I'm very open to discussing any of those. This is a Q&A rather than me presenting to you again the sort of topic that I've discussed on LinkedIn. So please feel free to type up your questions, and Hannah will tell me what sort of thing you've asked. And also, frankly, if you want, we can have a chat. You can join me here on stage and we can have a chat. Internet connection permitting, to see if we can discuss it together. It doesn't have to be just me talking alone at the screen. You can join me on stage. And replace essentially Hannah's picture on the screen. So are there any particular questions that you might have about this topic that made you want to join today's CTO Craft Bites? Please feel free to tell me. Hannah, do we have any questions so far? And also, what has the poll said so far?
Yes. So I'll start off with the poll. So wondering what job title some of our watchers currently hold. So we have a couple CTOs, a head of engineering, a director of engineering, and a few people that hold other job titles. We have, as far as organization size, we have some people that are 50 or less. Not many votes on that poll, so everyone get in the poll section and cast your votes. And then as far as what job title do some of our viewers aspire to have in the short to medium term, so far we have a couple people who aspire to be a CTO and a few that aspire to be something else. So we'd love to hear what that something else is if you want to throw that in the chat function. And then if you have any questions, use that Q&A function as well. So we do have one question, which I think has just disappeared. So that person may have, oh, here we go. So thank you, Adelina, for doing this, says Kanta. Could you share some anecdotal stories to set the scene?
Anecdotal stories about oh, there you go. It's nice, I can see it on the screen now. That's brilliant. Yeah, so for example, one off the top of my head was a female CTO that joined a company of about 500 people, 200 engineers. So as you can see, her department was one of the biggest, if not the biggest department in the business. And actually the red flags for this job were that the entire C-suite had left and had been replaced, including with her. So she had applied for the job and got the job, hadn't been promoted at the last moment. However, it was a very dramatic departure before this woman got the job. The entire C-suite had left, the investors, there was no one left from the previous C-suite. So as you'll imagine, it's very hard to take over a business and understand what the issues are when there's no handover period. You have no idea what happened beforehand. This particular lady also felt that she's the one who doesn't understand things, when in fact the challenge was that there was no clear direction for where this business was going. So the CTO found it very difficult to create a tech strategy because there is no business strategy. How are you going to create a tech strategy? I have another example for a much bigger company. This was 40,000 staff. And this female CTO joined a C-suite that was entirely made of men. And they specifically said to her at the interview stage that they wanted a female on the C-suite because they felt it was too male focused. Well, very soon after she joined, she discovered why. Because actually, this, although on paper, this C-suite was interested in including women, especially women in technology, in reality, they never liked any of the ideas she put forward. They never listened to any of the suggestions that she made. And she often struggled to influence them in any shape or form. And very soon she was deemed as not fitting the culture of the organization and pretty much kicked out. So does that give you a couple of flavor stories, two different size companies, as to why I wrote this kind of post?
I think so. So we did get a comment in the chat section saying that this person, Joe, currently aspires to be employed because, as we all know, multiple redundancies do suck. So I guess as someone who has just been affected by redundancies and is looking for employment, what are the signs that a role could be a setup for a glass cliff CTO?
I've only heard part of your question. However, I assume the question wasn't, please type or challenge me if this is not the question you asked. I presume the question was, what are the signs that you are going to a glass cliff situation type of job?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, that's brilliant to see it on the screen. Thank you so much. So yeah, what are the signs that this is a setup for a glass cliff CTO role? Brilliant, brilliant question. So let's look at it from two different examples. Let's say from the startup scale up perspective and then from a corporate enterprise perspective. Would that be helpful?
Yes, absolutely.
So, for example, from a startup perspective, when you have the interview for the job and you ask them questions like, what does success look like for this job in the first 6 months or 12 months or 18 months? And they don't seem to have defined success. In fact, they don't have a clear idea of what success looks like at all for this job. They just say, "Oh, you're just going to be managing engineering," and you will definitely struggle to meet undefined expectations and this kind of lack of direction. So you're being set up for failure from the beginning because there's no idea of what success looks like. Therefore, the goalpost can move at any time. The other startup scale up angle, which is the one that I mentioned in the case study earlier, is when there's an exodus before the job. If they say to you, "Oh, it's a new CEO, new CTO," or if they don't volunteer that information, you ask, "How long has everybody else been here?" Or you can look it up on LinkedIn. And if there was a recent exodus, you need to ask a lot of questions about why these people left or why they were let go. If they are being very cagey about the answers, those are some serious red flags right there. And then the third one is from a startup scale up perspective. For example, there is no clear strategy vision of product market fit stage. So there's a lack of clear business strategy or a defined path. There's a lack of a defined path to product market fit, which can result in wasted efforts and a high risk of failure. If they don't have a very clear vision of where this company is going, what are they trying to achieve with it, by when, this is risky because as an engineer and as a leader of engineering, it means that you will be everything will be important. Therefore, firefighting, burnout are guaranteed results. Can I before I move on to explain the signs of corporations and enterprise jobs with the same question, the sign is that it's a setup for a glass cliff CTO role. Would you like to ask me some questions about what I said about the scale up and startup side before I go to the corporate signs?
Well, that's a great question. If anyone has any questions that are specifically related to those startups or scale ups and the glass cliff that female and minority CTOs face, now would be a great time to throw those in the chat. So I'll give everyone a moment to type out any additional questions that they may have.
Or if not, just prepare the questions and I can carry on with the signs in a corporation. And I can answer them both afterwards.
I
I
guess
just
maybe,
wanted to give people the opportunity.
yeah, while we wait to see if anyone has any startup or scale up specific questions, do you find that these issues are more prevalent in large established organizations, or is it just as bad in startup and scaling organizations?
Sorry, I didn't hear the entire question.
Just put it on the screen for you.
Do you find that these issues are more prevalent in large established organizations, or is it just as bad in startups and scaling organizations? I mean, I think, to be honest, they're just as bad in startups and scaling organizations. This is why I've clustered them both together. In a corporation, the signs are slightly different, which I can answer in a moment. I can expand on in a moment. But they're worst in startups over 200 people because they're not small enough to have an excuse why they don't know where they're going, but they're big enough to have chaos. And that's kind of the worst of both worlds, I would say. Because in a startup, you'll have a bit more ability to influence people, but when it's 200, 500 people, it's not really a startup anymore. But at the same time, they still seem to have lots of startup legacy issues.
Awesome. So we don't have any other specific startup related questions.
Shall I move on with the signs from a... Sorry.
It's okay. Yes.
I'll move on then with the challenges from a corporation enterprise perspective. This sounds terrible, but would it be okay trying without video and see if the audio improves? Because I only hear about 20% of every question you ask me. I hope you can hear me, but I can't actually hear you at all, other than like 20% of every question. So would people mind if we switch off the video and see if that helps?
That works. I'll be the face.
Okay, right. So from a corporation and enterprise side of things, if you're applying for an engineering leadership role there, and there's ambiguity about why they chose you. If they're not transparent about how they see you adding value after you start the job, especially in the light of current departmental changes, it could be a warning sign. A lack of clarity here can lead to misunderstandings and mismatched objectives. And often candidates are scared to ask questions about, or when they offer you the job, discussing a bit more about which aspects of your experience did they find most useful, and how do they see the role playing out, and having these longer conversations before truly accepting the job and jumping in with both feet. Another kind of warning sign from a corporation side is that a lack of clear information about why the previous engineering leader left or the history of the role might indicate underlying issues. It's really important. If there's ambiguous role history, it's really important to understand as much of it as possible. And if they're cagey again about sharing that, that tells you something, because it could be that this role did very, very well for many years, and then all of a sudden something changed. Well, what was it that changed? Was it a personal challenge for that issue? Something changed in their family, which is fine? Or was it maybe a new general manager or a new VP of something joined, or a new CEO or a new CFO joined, and maybe this person is actually impacting quite dramatically how engineering is being run. So it'd be good to understand those dimensions, because if nothing else, you can negotiate certain things or support from the beginning, rather than kind of rolling with it and then finding out the kind of worst of the context later on. And the last kind of sign from a corporate perspective, in startups, people don't have that much data, but in corporations they do. And if you notice that they base their decisions or on relationships and on emotions rather than data, this suggests quite unstructured governance. So for a CTO, this may create an environment that's really filled with unpredictable changes and unclear decision-making processes, which will make navigating a corporate environment an absolute nightmare. So understanding a bit more about how these people make decisions is really, really important, and asking them to give you examples of how the company's been making various decisions, perhaps that impact engineering. It would be the time to ask the hard questions is at the kind of offer stage, I would say, more than after you join, because then in that offer stage, you can negotiate to have perhaps, you can negotiate from the beginning to have a coach or an advisor. I'll give you real genuine situations. I think in the last year alone, I've had 10 people who private messaged me after they got a role, a CTO type role, either in a corporation or in a scale up. And they were panicking behind the scenes saying, I'm 3 months in and only now I've realized that actually this is a disaster. I'm never going to succeed because I don't know X, Y, and Z. And I'm scared to say I want an advisor now because it's after the fact. So I'm going to stop there and give people the opportunity to ask more questions or ask for clarification. Hopefully you can hear me, because I don't hear anything at all. To me, it sounds like I'm speaking to a kind of blank room.
We
These
hear you.
issues sound to me like red flags for anyone. What about them? Oh, brilliant. That's great. I'm glad you can hear me. What about them do you see as glass cliff issues? Well, Andrea, can you tell me a bit more about what is it about them that they sound like red flags for anyone? Because, and I will wait for you if you want to come online and maybe join the conversation and speak to me directly. I'd love to understand this a bit more.
Andrea,
Because the kind of glass cliff situation is inside.
I was about to say, Adelina, Andrea,
Sorry, Hannah, you want to say something?
you can either jump onto the call if you'd like, or if you want to expand upon your question a bit in the comments section, we'll be able to see anything that you want to expand upon that. But I'll let Adelina maybe start answering it while you take a moment to type.
Yeah, so the glass cliff essentially to me is when you are, and it often happens, as I said, I think I said earlier, it happens often to women or to minorities or to people who are not necessarily have a lot of political acumen or connection to the investors in the business. You know, they were just an engineer beforehand, and then all of a sudden you are now put in a position where hey, congratulations, you got a promotion. And you're like, oh, wow, really? That's amazing and very exciting. And then actually, is it really? Because often you're set up for that promotion, but it's a crisis. You're appointed in periods when the company's having lots of challenges, lots of financial difficulties, and there you have to turn this ship around. If it's not a glass cliff, it's like the Titanic heading for an iceberg. You know, it's this massive ship that needs to be turned around from this impending disaster, or disaster has happened already, and you're now expected to patch the broken glass or the broken fuselage straight away and just turn it into a success. So it's kind of this is the kind of situation that I'm talking about. Is you are promoted because they kind of had to, because you're seen as the person who has the most technical knowledge, but actually you're not really promoted because of the potential you can bring to the business, and nor are you set up for success by being offered support that initially, frankly, you might not realize you need. You're just kind of like, oh, congratulations from a lead engineer, now you're a CTO. Oh, and by the way, we have this investment round coming up, can you make a tech strategy for it? And you're like, okay, never made a tech strategy, and there is no offer to say, by the way, if you need a mentor for that, we have a bit of budget that we can help you with that, or the CEO says, I know this is very challenging. There's an acknowledgement that this is a very difficult situation, and there is an acknowledgement that success in this situation might not be huge profits, but it might be avoiding a lawsuit, or success might be carrying on business as usual when it was actually a disaster. So, but please, Andrea, expand. I'm really curious to understand more what you mean.
So Andrea said we had a C-suite change recently. CEO and CPO resigned. And while searching, it was clear that candidates are seeing that as a red flag. And they were all white men in their 40s. So, Adelina, if you can't hear me, you can see that in the chat.
Yes, but yeah. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But here's the difference, right? The white men in their 40s who were seeing it as a red flag, they were seeing it as a red flag because they had seen the situation before. And they had also been given opportunities where they could see the situation before. But if you are, for example, a woman who has been a lot of, so I suppose one of the key differences is, for example, and I'm not saying this happens to all white men, and it's not actually white men as such. I would say is white men who are good at networking and who are good at boasting about their successes. Those are the white men who can read the red flags as well. The challenge is that a lot of minorities and women, but also white men who might not be as good at boasting and showing how great they are at their job, they won't get opportunities until those opportunities are a crisis. That's what I'm saying, that it's a glass cliff. It's almost like, well, if we didn't need you, we wouldn't have given you this. But if you would have been given lots of opportunities in the past, and you would have seen this. And this is why, as a white man who's been good at selling himself, you can see these red flags. However, if you are, and this is why I'm saying that women and minorities and the people who are kind of not, as I said, not good at selling themselves as well, they won't necessarily have had opportunities to see and understand and learn early on that these are red flags. And nobody's setting people up for failure on purpose. Okay, I want to make that clear. This is not a conscious decision. Oh, let's set this woman up for failure, or let's set this minority guy for failure. It's not like that. It's just that they often don't see these kind of people until there's a crisis and they need them quickly, or they need them in a crisis. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Shall I move on to the next question, which is, what are some steps that boards and hiring committees should take to ensure they aren't unconsciously contributing to the glass cliff for minority candidates?
Oh, that's a really great question. Right. So one of the key things I would say, and I hinted at this earlier, is the fact that acknowledging first and foremost that this is a glass cliff situation. So acknowledging that this is not a normal run-of-the-mill hire or promotion. So, it can be an external hire, or you're promoting someone internally. And I have to say, by the way, I have seen this happen to white males in their 40s as well. But the difference was that, like I said earlier, these are the white males who had PhDs and were very unnecessary, not having a lot of political acumen, or not necessarily knowing how to sell themselves and having a lot of experience of the market and the industry. So that happens to them as well. But most common, I have seen it with women. This is why I kind of said that in the post. But the first key thing, it would be to acknowledge that this is a difficult situation. This is a really hard thing to do. And to acknowledge why you might be giving the opportunity to this woman, or to this neurodiverse person, or to this guy who might not have been offered the CTO role had you not been in this crisis. That's the key part of it, is the fact that you wouldn't have offered it to him or her or them if you hadn't been in a difficult, sticky situation. And to acknowledge that and say why, and acknowledge and really look at which aspects of this person's experience do we think will help us turn the ship around, and being honest with them about it. But also being honest with them and doing a genuine assessment right at the outset about what gaps will this person need to ramp up on really quickly to be able to turn this ship around. Because let's say if 60% we think actually they fit the criteria for the type of technologies they're familiar with, or they know our legacy code, and we think they're the safest bet for us to have carrying on with engineering leadership. That's brilliant. But Also acknowledging that now this is a different job than what they've been doing for the last 3, 5, 6 years, however long they've been there. Now the job is to look at, okay, how do we help them understand and calculate the business value of certain engineering tasks? How do we help them understand what core things does technology need to change to be able to add the most business value, or to be able to turn that ship around in the shortest, cheapest amount of time possible? Those are the sort of skills that this person probably won't have if they've never been given this opportunity before. Or the other glass cliff situation where you are hiring a woman CTO because you want a female voice on the board, but at the same time, when she's challenging you and she's asking you difficult questions or raising proposals that are very different than the way you're used to doing things, instead of immediately shutting them down, becoming curious. So I would say these are some very clear steps one can take to really prevent unconsciously setting someone up for failure, because nobody is intentionally malicious. It's all frankly done just from lack of consideration of where we are, where we want to be, and what gaps does this person need to fill to achieve, help us achieve that.
That was great. Thanks, Adelina. So we have another question, which is from yours truly. So curious, if someone finds themselves in one of these roles, what are some next steps that they can take?
Yeah, so that's the kind of not worst case situation, but getting close to the worst case situation, right? So you are in this kind of role, you're 3 months, 6 months into the job, and you've just realized that, oops, that's me. Maybe you're on this call, or you hear this recording, or you saw the post I wrote, and you go, oops, that is definitely me. What do I do now? I would say, from my experience, it depends on the culture you have inside the business. But I'm going to give you some suggested actions, and obviously make a judgment call if those would work, considering your company culture, the type of CEO you have, the type of decision makers that can have an impact on this. But my core advice would be to actually analyze, what gap have you identified between what you feel able to do and what the company expects you to do. Acknowledging that gap, and what would it take from your perspective, and you won't know the answer to this question necessarily, but I think you need to then start researching that answer by talking to people like me and others, and perhaps even talking to the leads in other departments to understand a bit more what is the priority from their perspective. But the core thing I'd say is what the company expects from you and what you feel you can deliver, and the gap between those two. I would frankly have a one-to-one chat with the CEO or whoever is your nearest boss, and acknowledge that elephant in the room. Have a conversation about that and say, look, now I've been in the job for 3 to 6 months. I understand there is this gap. And I have to tell you, I have worked with some CTOs who did this, and actually the CEO respected them 10 times more than before, because this, I'm thinking of one person in particular, this geeky guy that was hired to turn everything around, all of a sudden seems to have a lot of political acumen, business acumen, and proactively thinking about, this is what my shortcomings are. I tell you, a lot of the CEOs that I've worked with, but then obviously that's skewed as well. That's what I'm saying. Put this through, stress test this with your own company culture. They actually respected the CTO doing that more, because they helped that this is a proactive CTO that I can trust, because he or she will tell me when they're not capable of delivering the job. That means that I can trust them because they are also willing to learn and adapt, or say, this is what my limitations are, and this is what I suspect, what I think we could do to mitigate them. there's a lot of power and there's a lot of projection of confidence, capability, and authority when you do something like that. And I think it's really, really important to have those honest conversations. If you don't feel safe to have those honest conversations, I think my first question would be, what is it about the situation that makes you unsafe to do that? And maybe balance out, is it worth the risk of doing this or not? Is it worth the risk of being upfront about it and being fired? Or is it you prefer to carry on paddling under the surface and hoping that you'll make a success of it? Kanta Croft, I see, says here, I would add, get comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations with confidence and with business focus. Love it, Kanta. Spot on. Absolutely spot on. I'm going to stop there because otherwise it can become a huge monologue. I'm more than happy to answer clarifying questions or anything else if necessary.
All right, great. We'll see if any additional questions do come in for additional clarifying. But in the meantime, move on to the next question. What do you think companies should be doing to create more equitable opportunities for female and minority leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think some of the stuff that I've mentioned already, I don't like to repeat myself, but I think some of the things I've mentioned already, like, for example, actually, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So in 2010, we had the Equality Act coming in, which reformed a lot of the previous equality and human rights legislation. And I was involved in being one of the advisors to the Equality and Human Rights Commission on creating the guidance for employers and various other people with regards to equality. And I remember at the time, while the act was being drafted, one of the things that we were asked to consider was, is positive discrimination a good thing for employment and helping women into leadership roles or not? And I remember thinking about this question 15 years ago. I think it was 2009 when we were discussing this before it became law. This didn't make it to law, by the way. And one of the things that we were concerned about was that, because positive discrimination was assuming that a woman and a man would be equally qualified, but you choose the woman because you want to have a different opinion, a different kind of angle, and a different mix, a gender mix in the team or in the exec or whatever. But actually, the question was, how would you judge that a woman and a man had equal expertise? I mean, that's such a subjective thing to judge. And I think this is one of the reasons why positive discrimination didn't make it into law, because it was seen as a really dangerous path that people could go down. I think to create more equitable opportunities for female and minority leaders, one of the things is actually not appointing people on relationships, based on the relationships we have with them. In startups and scale-ups in particular, there's a lot of nepotism, but in the sense of, oh, I worked with so-and-so at this other company, and they did that, so come on here and do it here. And I've seen this where the culture in that company and the way they did things in that company don't work in this new company. And usually it's the hippo, the highest paid person's opinion in the room. The hippo is the one who gets people like that into the business, and then everyone else struggles to explain why this person is not actually doing what the company needs them to do. So hiring based on what do we need them to achieve and what kind of personality do we need to achieve this, I think is much more important than hiring, because I know Mark, John, David, Peter, whatever, all these kind of unusual names, Paul. I mean, I know more Paul VPs of engineering than I know women CTOs in general, and that's a very common thing that I think people do. That's not helping, because if that woman, or for example, golfing buddies, or we worked in another company. But if that woman or that minority guy didn't work with you in those previous companies, or didn't go golfing with you, or they don't join your club or whatever it is, then they'll never get a chance. A lot of appointments, 70% of jobs are done through your network, apparently. Well, there's a if you don't open up beyond the immediate network you have, you're never going to get people with a different kind of way of seeing things as well. So these are just kind of a couple of things that I can suggest in my experience anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah, bromance culture. I love it. Spot on.
Oh, did that happen in the chat? Yeah. End up being a bromance culture. So maybe to jump back, I think this is related to the question I asked previously from Joel. If you encounter any of these signs as you're approaching an opportunity or change, so you're not in it yet, you're approaching it, what advice would you have for how to address them at that point?
Yeah. So you encounter any of these signs as you're approaching an opportunity or change, what advice would you have? Yeah. So if you're approaching an opportunity, I would ask some really tough questions at the interview stage. Especially if they make an offer, but even at the interview stage, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. I would say things like, I would ask things like, what sort of things has your company put in place to make sure that the person who gets this job succeeds at the job? And just see how they react. If they say, well, we will make sure we hire the right person, then that's the wrong answer, because they're not giving you the reality of things. Like, for example, they could say, we know we're not perfect, and we actually want someone who will tell us things as they are, and they will give us an honest assessment of what they see is happening within engineering. To our knowledge, this is what's happening in engineering, and this is where we think that hiring you are the best person for the job. So I would be asking some really tough questions about it. And I would also ask, back to the point about lack of clarity, I would ask things like, so what does success look like for this job in the next 6, 12, 18 months? And again, if you get a vague answer, like, oh, you'll be leading engineering, or you'll be in charge of making sure we deliver features. Again, it's kind of like it's another red flag. And then therefore you can say, well, and actually follow up with questions like, this is not specific enough. And this is actually, by the way, a conversation I had with the CEO a few weeks ago, where they kept changing the goalpost of what success would look like for the CTO. And I said to him, it's not fair. You're constantly changing what success looks like for this guy. He'll never achieve anything. You keep demotivating him by keep changing your mind about what he needs to be good at. And when I pointed that out, the CEO was taken a bit aback, because he'd never had someone being so blunt with him. But unfortunately, or fortunately, I am. But this is the sort of tough questions. They're at the right time to ask when you see the opportunity and when you're discussing with them, and understanding that actually the more questions you ask about how to get to those business goals, and the more all of your questioning at the interview stage is about, or even before interview, is about the business goals and how clear those are, and how far the company is towards achieving those goals, and how they envisage achieving them, and what's the business strategy for that, and all of these things, drilling into the detail of that will actually help the company respect you more and see you more as a leader and someone that understands it's all about the business, rather than someone who just focuses on the technology and on Rust and on microservices and on CI/CD. Well, that's lovely, but how is that making a change to our ARR, annual recurring revenue, or our MRR, monthly recurring revenue?
That was great. Thanks, Adelina. So we still have a bit of time left. Does anyone have any additional questions for Adelina? Oh, we have something coming in. Thanks, Adelina. I really like the Q&A. Your questions focus on the part and responsibility for your success and the specific outcomes rather than duties. Very good point, Joel. Yeah, I think very appreciative for your time today, Adelina. Is there anything you want to add in addition, maybe that we didn't cover today, that you feel like would be an important takeaway for our audience? Hopefully you heard that. I'll put it in the Q&A function. There we go.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I didn't hear anything you said, Hannah. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Any key takeaways our audience should have from today's chat? For anyone who's worried about essentially taking a wrong career step, because that's what this is about, really. It's about protecting yourself in your future career. I would say awareness of the issue is absolutely crucial. So understanding, first of all, what you're getting yourself into. And this is why the grilling of the CEO or of the hiring manager at the interview stage not only shows them how you think about the job and how business driven you are, but also about the fact that you you then acknowledge and realize that this is a potential trap. And being aware of that is 10 times better than walking into it with your eyes shut. And then while you're in the middle of the job and you're committed and it's on your CV and there's all this kind of people that you're meant to be satisfying, it's much better to become aware of that, because if nothing else, you can set out some rules at the outset. And before you accept the job, especially if they make the offer, you can clarify and work with them to clarify what success looks like, where do they see you adding value. I mean, I don't think most people ask an interviewer when they make an offer to say, can I have a chat and understand where do you think I would add value to a business that made you want to offer me the job? How many people ask that question? I don't think many. In fact, I had a CTO guy who was offered a job in a scale up as CTO and a job in one of the big companies like Amazon, Microsoft, etc., as also a vertical CTO. And he was like, oh, I'm definitely going to take the big tech job, the Amazon, the Google, the whatever. I'm going to take that job. And I said, okay, what makes you take that job? Well, because I think it'll be safer and da-da-da. And then, I asked him a very important question, which was, what will it take for you to accept the scale-up job? Because now you're worried you're going to let these people down, but also you're worried that actually there's a missed opportunity. You can make a lot of money by having that job because they're on an upward trajectory. Having that question and asking yourself, what will it take to make this job a success? I can see the red flags, but what will it take? And dwelling on that question, discussing that question with other people, maybe with people like me as well, other coaches, etc. I think it's a really, really important thing. So knowing what you're getting into is okay, even if you say, yes, I acknowledging that I'm going to a potential glass cliff situation, but it's a risk I'm willing to take, and these are the things that I'm willing to do to mitigate it. And that would be my key takeaway, I would say, for anyone being concerned and having to choose between various roles. It's really, really important to understand what are you getting into. And the best time to do that is at the interview stage.
Awesome. I just want to say thank you so much to Adelina Chalmers, the founder of the Geek Whisperer, for her time today. It looks like that's all the questions we have from our audience. So if you're interested in attending any other future bites with CTO Craft, you can go to our website, where we also post on Eventbrite. So hopefully we'll see you at the next one. Thank you so much for everyone's patience with a bit of our technical difficulties, but I think we did all right and had a great conversation. So until next time, thank you so much.